Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Sirens Making Sense of the World. I'm your host, Joel Rubin, and I'm really excited about today's conversation where we bring together politics and foreign policy and try to make sense of what it all means with the leaders in this country and thought leaders as far as understanding and explaining where we are in the world and what it means in our domestic politics and how our domestic politics affects what we're doing overseas. But we have a really unique guest today with Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vindman. Alex served, as I'm sure all of you know, served in the Trump administration, the end at the National Security Council, long time officer and served in the Army for about 20 years. He is now a senior advisor to Vote Vets. I don't want to completely mangle your bio, Alex. You'll be able to explain it much better than I can. But Alex really shot to the national stage back about 6-7 years ago during the first Trump impeachment, where his bold, principled, moral leadership catapulted him into the public eye, where he spoke about Ukraine from a policy perspective and some of the dangers that then President Trump was advancing and utilizing American military aid, from my perspective, illegally, and certainly I think from the testimony that Alex gave, illegally as well. And he was impeached for it, deservedly so. And since then, Alex, you've really been a force of nature on talking to the American people about not just Ukraine, but about values and morals and American leadership and the principles of American leadership. So first and foremost, I wanted to thank you for being with us here today on Making Sense of the World.
Well, thanks, Joel. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I always enjoy being introduced as interesting guest. That's good. And also, you highlighted shot to prominence, 6 years ago. I mean, for a lot of people, that's irrelevant. The more important thing is I appeared on Curb Your Enthusiasm on two different seasons for the finale. So I get asked about that pretty often.
Well, if you're on Curb, you've already well surpassed us. I was on a reality TV show about 20 years ago called Curb Appeal. So it was not Curb Your Enthusiasm, but we were fixing up our house. So look, Larry David, maybe we can get him on here for Making Sense of the World as well. And we'll get him on with Bernie as well, and they can do a twin for him. I mean, look, Alex, your story is so rich and it's so diverse. I actually would really like to, before getting into some of the policy issues, get into some of the who are you issues. And as an American Jew, I got to say, I really was inspired seeing you and your story as an immigrant, a Jewish immigrant from Ukraine, and how you wove that story into your principles and your values as to why you chose to serve in the military, and then to speak out. Can you share with the audience a little bit about who you are and where you come from?
It's interesting. I somewhere along the way, after I was called to testify, may have been before the closed door testimony to the intelligence community that was still classified, or in between that and the public testimony. I remember having a conversation with my terrific rabbi at Congregation of Dot Reim in Virginia, and he reminded me of a famous bit of wisdom from Rabbi Hillel: "If not you, who? If not now, when?" Now I already had reported the corruption and was preparing to testify, but it was a good thing to kind of further underscore the urgency of the moment and my unique responsibilities because of what I was responsible for. I was the director for European affairs. I mean, I think a lot of people know me for Ukraine. I was born there, came to the U.S. when I was 4 years old as a Jewish refugee, but my career, especially as a foreign area officer and a diplomat, was actually Russia, and figuring out how do we contend with Russia as an adversary. So it's an oddity to me that I still get kind of associated with my secondary area of expertise, and not my primary, which was Russia, Eastern Europe, Eurasia, and my doctoral dissertation, which is my second book, was about the relationship between Russia, Ukraine, and the U.S. Over the past 30 plus years, 35 years. But um, that covers a decent bit of my bio. 22 years almost in the military, serving in the ranks as a troop leader, then as a diplomat, as a foreign area officer, in all sorts of interesting postings in Ukraine and Russia, in the Pentagon, and then finally in the White House, where my career and my future plans for myself were derailed when I reported an abuse of power, which is what Trump was impeached for.
That's right. That's right. But why did you report it? Like why?
Why? I mean, it's almost like, even in it takes you drawing that question out in order for me to answer. It was not something that I really spent a huge amount of time dwelling on. I mean, I was responsible. There were plenty of things that were um, odd, inappropriate, awful, and maybe potentially unlawful that were occurring at various moments. But this was squarely in my area of responsibility as a director for European affairs. My mandate was to shepherd national security relationships with the countries in my portfolio. Um, from one standpoint, I was hired under the auspices of President Trump's national security strategy, which was focused on bolstering these struggling democracies under Russian pressure, securing the U.S. under a Russian onslaught with regards to hybrid warfare. That's what I was hired on for, under something that President Trump signed. And then what ended up happening is his personal aspirations, his scheme to steal the 2020 election was at odds with what was, his own dictate for
Hmm.
me that I was operating under. And then as I started to roll through this process, I found the entirety of the U.S. community, national security community, uh, supporting what the president signed onto, this national security strategy, at odds with his kind of whim to try to steal an election. So again, everything came together to counsel me uh, r- to to tell the president that this was a mistake, and I did this in behind closed doors and kind of in classified channels. He didn't heed that warning, and ultimately resulted in an investigation and oversight from Congress that brought me into the public eye. And at that point, I just kind of held to my principles and my values and my initial report, and kind of put my own personal aspirations secondary, and maybe sense of self-preservation secondary to what my obligations were. And that's really how it unfolded.
I mean, we're so lucky that you did. I have a question after this, but I do want to make a point, which is, I have three daughters, and when I talk to them about public service and principle, and I served in and out of the government for a number of years, and in the Peace Corps and on Capitol Hill, and I think ultimately these are jobs where you're entrusted to serve the public, the American people. They're patriotic roles. They're roles where you are there in support of the bigger picture, which is our country, and to have the ethics of values and country first, that is so paramount and so important to ensure that we have a functioning, thriving democracy. And it requires people to speak up with courage when that comes into conflict with the direction that certain people want to take the government. In this case, Trump wanted to take the government in his own personal direction. And that courage, that profile and courage, is essential for next generation leaders, for young people to see. And so I can't imagine that you'll ever know how many people you affected in the right way by speaking out publicly and for public service and for patriotism, the American people. And the reason I'm doing this podcast, though, and I want to get to this question, is that it's sort of this intersection of international and domestic, that you lived at that tension point right there, where you saw an international security goal come into conflict with a domestic political ambition. So when that hit, and that moment hit where the light bulb goes off, oh my God, is this actually happening? Do you remember that moment where it occurred to you that this might truly be what you're witnessing?
I mean, I certainly, you know, I want to make a point about modeling behavior, especially for the young people, and then I want to answer that a very important question. I think part of the lesson that I would like to communicate for folks that find themselves in this situation is that there are consequences for actions. Those consequences often could be bad. There, it's not Hollywood, and you have to deal with it and live on and kind of be resilient. And part of what I find myself doing is trying to model kind of still. Being successful and finding other ways to have an impact, whether it's pursuing a doctorate and writing a couple of books that were New York Times bestsellers, and lecturing and communicating to the public at large, and all sorts of different things. That I'm only I'm 50, so I'm kind of in a lot of ways feel like I'm just getting started.
You're a baby.
Um, yeah. So there's a lot of things to do to recover even from some hardships. Now, with regards to the question here, remind me again what it was.
Sort of like,
Since this,
did the
yeah,
light bulb go off, at
yes,
that moment?
right.
And do you
So
remember that? Yeah.
I do. I mean, there were a couple of times where there was a clarity around what I knew I had to do. The
Hmm.
first was when the Trump administration, and it wasn't President Trump yet. It was henchmen. So there was a bit of lack of clarity of whether this is what the president wanted, or whether it was people that were trying to curry favor with him. When they put a hold on the about $400 million of support that we had pledged, that Congress had pledged to Ukraine, that I was going to pull it out of the shadows. I could do that. I was in a position of extremely significant responsibility, and I didn't have to sit on my hands. I could basically draw together the entirety of the national security establishment and get some consensus on what we should be doing. And I did that all the way through, the cabinet level, and a presidential decision memo advanced by his national security advisor, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State. I didn't have to, I just didn't have to sit there and accept things that, like, in the scheme. Then there was another moment in which the president personally implicated himself in a phone call,
Hmm. Hmm.
and my thinking on this was pretty clear. My responsibility was to advance U.S. national security interests. It wasn't to contradict the president so much as to provide counsel on what we should be doing, and potentially also say that this is going to be harmful to his own agenda, which is what I communicated to the chain of command. And ultimately, the president didn't heed that warning, and it resulted in oversight from Congress and a number of committees. And then I was called to testify, and there again, I just told the truth. I was a fact witness telling the truth. So there were, I mean, I certainly recognize the gravity
Right.
of the moment. I've said this scores of times, but Eugene, my twin brother, who's now congressman, was right across the hall from me as a chief ethics official. And I walked into his office, closed the door, and for dramatic effect paused and made sure I had his attention. And I said, Eugene, if what I'm about to tell you ever becomes public, Trump will get impeached. Never didn't believe that that it would become public and that this was going to play out, but I was just illustrating the gravity of the moment. And then ultimately that's what ended up happening, because the president is his own worst enemy a lot of times. He's ignorant,
Hmm.
incompetent, and malicious, and to his own detriment oftentimes, and to the
So
American
that
people.
So now with that insight into his character and his nature, and then of course what you went through when you were public about it, and of course your deep passion and your interest in Russia and Ukraine and in Europe policy overall, what we're in the middle of right now is this strange dynamic, right? Where I tend to feel like Vladimir Putin has a little wind at his sails now diplomatically. Certainly, he's just embraced by Modi and Xi in Beijing, and that's not out of context. He just met with President Trump a week and a half ago, as
Yeah.
well. When you look back at your expertise, you're obviously prolific in your writing and your speaking, your media appearances, and then you add to that the layers of the personal intrigue. How much and the personal interest the president had in trying to find a way to utilize Ukraine aid to win or steal the election in 2020. Um, yeah. How do you assess what's happening right now then in terms of these machinations and the sort of, yeah, Putin has to get a ceasefire or else, and now, well, maybe no ceasefire, some other end of war. Like it's all sort of jello up
Mhm.
against the wall, right? It makes no sense. So what
Yeah.
what do you see? What's really going on
So
here?
I'll start with, probably a bit of wishful thinking. I think about, as a strategist, I think about, like, are there
Sure.
opportunities in this chaos? It's a right now it's a disaster, and I kind of you know pivot between mitigated disaster and unmitigated disaster. But I'm wondering if in unpredictability, if you throw out the whole playbook and you start from scratch, is there something that the president could achieve just, without with this idea that, like, there are no rules, everything is kind of in play, and ultimately I kind of come to the conclusion that no, this is not the president to make any really notable achievements. I think anything that he takes credit for is likely to be temporary. There were some things like the Azerbaijan Armenian um, peace deal, which possibly could work if the U.S. stays engaged, and the U.S. ends up being kind of the broker for economic transactions, and at the same time warns off Azerbaijan from additional, kind of military action against Armenia. But those underlying issues have not been resolved.
Right.
Pakistan, India, periodic
Huh.
flare-ups will not resolved. Nothing really that he's taking credit for is ultimately resolved. I mean, it's maybe buttoned up and for a little bit, which may not be all that different from other administrations, but very, very loosely. And I think that there's trouble on the horizon. I think, if we look at how this summit with Putin went, Putin was, his reputation was laundered and bolstered.
Hmm.
He was being recognized as a international war criminal with a warrant for his arrest from the International Criminal Court, but he could get the red carpet treatment in the U.S. And then he goes on to, the Shanghai Security Cooperation Organization meetings and meets with Xi and Modi, and gets like a world leader's welcome. And what does he have to show for it, Trump? Does he have a peace? Does he have a ceasefire? Nothing.
Nothing.
And it's all a bunch of pie in the sky ideas about how to get something done, get anything done to get a PR win. And this is in the foreign policy context where he actually has extremely wide powers. His Article 2 powers, according to the Constitution, are vast. So we might see another adventure with regards to Venezuela. That's one of the
Oh
things that's
yeah.
being speculated again about
Hmm.
today, is that we might strike out at Venezuelan, now designated terrorist groups that were cartels, drug cartels, or it could be any number of different things. The
Which,
fact that we don't know is shocking.
by the way, I gotta digress on that one. I mean, to me, it's an abuse of the designation to name drug cartels, FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations. It's
Yeah,
like, I mean, you have deep government experience. Lines of effort need to be clear. Taskings need to be clear. People need to know what their roles are. What I feel like is we're making alphabet soup now of all of our
yeah,
national security. We're like making drug lords terrorists, and maybe terrorists are drug lords, and then let's use the military and let's rename it to the Department of War, which may end up being the dynamic, and let's throw the
yeah.
police into DC, maybe LA, it's illegal. It's all a big mess of confusion. And so, if you're the foreign government, if you're Putin now and you're looking at this, how does it make you feel when you see all this kind of like chaotic decision making?
I mean, he's definitely emboldened. I think, I have having served in Russia for 3 years and studied Russia extensively. It's interesting that Russia they don't have rule of law. They basically rule by law, meaning they use
Mm.
the law as a means to oppress and suppress their population. And we were a country of laws, and where rule of law was sacrosanct. And frankly, I don't think there are no rules. Period. If you look at the past 7 months of the Trump administration, fundamentally, the continuous threat are there are no rules. The rules have been thrown out the window. So troops in the streets in our cities, which is, to me, pretty disgusting and dangerous, and intended to coerce and suppress opposition, and potentially it's setting conditions for efforts to steal elections here. If I was an independent observer, looking at a different country,
That's right.
there would be some telltale signs. But it's the same thing, the lawlessness about, like, uh, these transfers of prisoners to third countries. It's the fact that he has all sorts of schemes to self-enrich with regards to crypto or
Right.
jets, or there is no rule of law in this country. And if maybe one caveat, if there is, that rule of law does not apply to Donald Trump.
Hmm. Right. It's everybody else has to observe it except for one. And I mean, the word that pops to mind and that people use and they throw it out willy nilly. But I think when it comes from a person with your gravitas and expertise, the word authoritarianism pops up.
Yeah.
Um, when we speak about authoritarianism and you have your national security hat on and you're using that, what do you see as the sort of dynamic happening now here in the US? And what are some of the telltale signs and what are not like authoritarians, I think in the American Hollywood driven mindset is sort of like a harsh dictator who's imprisoning everybody and abusing power left and right, and it's very harsh and clear and real and immediate. That's one thought, but there are all different flavors of authoritarian, as you know better than anybody.
Sure. So I think
What's your take?
these are the features, I think, of authoritarianism. The fact that there's no checks on the president, so no checks and balances in our system. We have three co-equal branches of government. There are no checks. There's no
Right.
judicial check. There's no legislative check. Legislative branches, if anything, a rubber stamp. Another interesting hallmark are the fact that the rules don't apply to that authoritarian. Another, I think, important hallmark is the fact that he's willing to use hard power. So, law enforcement or the military to intimidate and oppress, and he's certainly doing that, against opponent. I'd say right now he's not targeting he's starting to target individuals, but he's targeting kind of groups, just Democrats writ large. And let's say LA,
Hmm.
he's menacing Chicago and New York and Philadelphia, all sorts of other places. That's another hallmark of an authoritarian, that he's willing to use these tools. And then you go after specific targets, like his opponents, his critics, like John Bolton is an example. The
Right.
fact that he put in these henchmen, whether it's Kash Patel in the FBI, to be able to persecute opponents. Tulsi Gabbard she's not coordinating intelligence to protect the nation. She's basically advancing a narrative that the president wants, and penalizing former government officials. So these are the kind of the general hallmarks: lack of rule of law, lack of checks and balances, hard tools to go after opponents, and eventually, potentially, maybe even a concerted effort to steal an election. But I will mention that this is a guy, as I said before, that is, pretty self-destructive. He's his own worst enemy. And one of the things that, just looking at recent events, that the summit, I took away a strange positive from the summit. When the president was prepared for his meeting with Putin, as I contend, but then failed in execution, he just completely got rolled in execution.
Right.
That is somebody that doesn't have the competence to follow through. And when you talk about an authoritarian takeover, that makes his job harder. If he was competent and he had the ability to follow through, he'd be far more dangerous. But he's self-destructive, and he really hasn't shown much of an ability to follow through. So I think that's, if anything, kind of a bit of a silver lining.
The double-edged sword. Yeah, the
Yeah.
silver lining there. But so let's take it based on that, right? So now, you know, that's the assessment of Vladimir Putin or Zelensky or Xi or Macron or any international leader. And they're looking at America, they're looking at the direction, they're looking at the rule of law diminishment that's underway right now. And yet they're seeing somebody who they kind of think probably won't follow through, but maybe he will follow through. I mean, how do you, as an American national security leader, and we're heading into the UN General Assembly in a few weeks, right, up in New York,
Yeah.
how do you if you're advising the president, how do you prepare to prepare that president, our president, to go to meetings to advance the American national interests when you have leaders around the world looking at him like that? Like, what expectations now? I guess maybe this is the
Yeah.
cleaner question. What expectation now should we as Americans have for our president and what he's trying to do in our name around the world?
Yeah. So first of all, the preparing him part is extremely difficult. He doesn't think he needs preparation. He thinks he knows he has all the answers, and he doesn't understand history. He doesn't understand context. Doesn't understand, the complexities of these issues. Everything's superficial. So preparing him is notoriously a nightmare. With regards to how our adversaries and our friends actually look
Yeah,
at him, he's completely unreliable, and there is still probably a great degree of wishful thinking from our allies that somehow, they could navigate Trump, pander to him to keep him on sides. And at times they get some helpful signals, like, the pledge of 5% of GDP for NATO member states have
right.
kept him engaged. And I think he's dropped this idea of departing NATO, at least for the time being. He could pivot back again, if he gets pissed off or something. He's notoriously mercurial, but so he's unreliable. And we were the backbone of our security alliance, and the fact that they now have to kind of go it alone, rebuild or build institutions that weren't there, is going to be extremely difficult. We'll be cut out of future security arrangements to our own detriment. For our adversaries, I think, frankly, they have a little bit more clarity. They think that he could be bought off. They think that he could be manipulated. They think he could be pandered to. And maybe, again, out of this summit with Putin, a worst case scenario, they know that he could be rolled. So this idea that he
Right.
might be able to get
Right.
away with like a madman theory, that, he's the guy that like could, think that he could win a nuclear war or something of that nature, I don't think that holds. He doesn't have the stomach for it. And I think, the bar for that is
Hmm.
extremely high. But and nobody's looking to kind of for a direct confrontation with the U.S. The Russians are not interested in it. The Chinese are not. But in general, I think that they think they could roll him because they think that he's folded on several occasions, whether it's tariffs, whether it's Putin. So I think that's a dangerous situation.
So then, Alex, with that in mind, that sort of like the idea that America and the America that you and I, grew up around or watching, and certainly the one that I believed I joined when I joined service, of having a strong executive, a strong commander in chief who was grounded in American values and patriotism and worked with our elected officials in the Congress and followed the rule of law and advanced policies that provided a sense of stability and security. Is that all gone? Like, is it over? Can we ever get it back?
I think it's suspended. I think it's we have less than 3.5 years. We will struggle through this with things getting worse. I'd say, we have months more of things getting worse. I think it's possible that we turn a bit of a corner or start to or get veer around a corner in November with some decisive wins. I think there's some special elections for Congress. I think there are that tighten up the numbers in the House. I think that decisive victories in the two critical gubernatorials uh, could then send a chilling effect through the Republican Party, that they will get blown out, and we don't necessarily
Mm-hmm.
have to wait all the way through 2026 in the midterm elections. I think we could start to potentially see folks peeling away. You know, there is something to suggest that Trump is maybe even in failing health.
Right.
I don't know. I don't want to overstate that. My experience in places like Russia, where we were constantly watching, let's say, Putin,
Oh God,
was that there were always
Kremlinology
rumors.
in
Yeah,
America now.
that's
Yes.
right. So now, like, a lot of wish casting, that he, his health fails him or something like that. So I don't buy that, but there's some interesting indications of that. I mean, like, Rachel will point out that there was a shooting in Minneapolis. It was a trans shooter, and uh, uh, you know, and Trump didn't pursue criticizing Mike Waltz. That's really quite odd.
Yeah.
Something like that would be a layup for him or something like that, and he didn't really do that. So I don't know. We'll see. Well, and he's been a little bit incognito these past couple days. I don't want to overstate it. Probably could be just a scare or something of that nature, but a lot of unknowns. We just are living through enormous unpredictability because nothing works as it really should. Our systems are breaking down, and then
So,
we could
so
rebuild on the back end.
well, that's I wanted to make sure, and by the way, thank you for the really dynamic, rich, diverse conversation that we're having here, because what I really want to do with this podcast is talk to people as people, not just as an automaton or a 33-minute, breaking news soundbite responder, but actually your people. We're all people. And we're trying to navigate this. And you, in your experience, you've got the kind of experience that is really valuable at this moment in time for people to hear from, to understand how to navigate this. And so I really want to just close with asking you to please share with the audience your recommendations on how to live through this deep period of suspended animation, of stress, of potential threat, and all of that. And what are some of the strategies that you've employed over the last 6, 7 years to
Mhm.
help people get through and hopefully get to the other side healthy and safe?
Yeah. So a couple of different things. First of all, there have been a lot of critical things that have unfolded, but not everything could be treated like a crisis. You just can't be in crisis mode endlessly. So don't feel bad if drop out for a little bit, collect yourself, and then pitch back into the fight. Uh, not everything, not everything requires kind of immediate attention. There are plenty of voices that are critical. So I think that's one of the things. I could see on the horizon that there is going to be just a growing backlash to these types of policies. Trump's approval ratings are in the toilet, kind of
Hmm.
historic lows. I think we're just now starting to see some of the effects of his policies unfold. Remember, we're 7 months in. We've got almost 3.5 years to go. So there will be an opportunity to rally in huge ways, whether it's in elections, like one of them is around the corner in November, or just protests to continue to indicate that the population is not happy, is prepared to criticize and resist and fight back. These are important signals in their own right. Um, Look for what if in certain regards I focus on national security and defense, which is in my view has expanded to domestic issues like law enforcement being used against our own population. But think about the things that really matter to you, and figure out ways to pitch in and communicate to your fellow citizens in your community and your elected officials. These are all pretty helpful ways to feel like you're doing something.
Well, Alex Vindman, you are an example for us all at perseverance and fortitude and success. And certainly the national security community, which is facing its own duress right now. You've already gone through much of the pain that a lot of folks, I think, are starting to go through right now. And I know I
Yeah.
personally appreciate it, and watching you from a distance and meeting with you now and talking about it. I know many more people do. So want to thank you for being here with us. And before we go, I want to make sure you share with us where we can find you. You've got a lot of work out there, and what would you like to share with the audience is the best place to find you?
Sure. So basically all the social media platforms, but I write extensively on Substack at avinman.com. I had a second book come out earlier this year. It's still relevant. The subtitle is how the West deceived itself about Russia and betrayed Ukraine. That's should be present tense because
Hmm.
it's happening today. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, those are good places to catch me and find out what I'm doing.
And we'll also see the Vote Vets ads out there. Know that you're quite active
Of
behind the
course.
scenes and shaping them as well. And Alex, thanks to you and to Rachel, your outstanding wife, and congratulations to her for her election at the DNC Veterans and Military Families Caucus co-chair. So
Hmm.
that's an example for us all. And of
Yeah,
course, your brother for his service in Congress as well. And again, thank you so much for being with us and helping us to make sense of the world.
thank you.